So I'm here with world-renowned expert, trends forecaster, and astrologer William Stickevers. How are you doing tonight, William?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on your New Year's show again. It's an honor and a pleasure.
Yeah, and it's great to see you again this year. This is the third year in a row, and I've been following you for years. I'm a part of the Global Transformation Astrology Group, which is anyone who's interested in the economy, world events. It's really a must because you are really been over the years. You've been extremely successful in forecasting trends through using astrology. Now we had a very interesting year last year. Now, what do you see this year for 2023? Would you like to start with maybe the economy?
Well, I think the big issue with America is once called the land of opportunity, and now it's very clear, certainly since COVID and a lot of the policies that were put in place, that in looking at what they've been doing to the economy in terms of trying to keep it propped up, it's really controlled by an oligarch of the 1%. So, the land of the free is degraded into a political dictatorship, a totalitarian form of democracy, or totalitarian democracy as they formally term it. Right. And this is the big issue that is underlying what's happening with the body politic of America as it's going through its U.S. Pluto return. The big problem, of course, is that half of Americans or half of your listeners totally understand what I'm saying, totally get it. The other half are about tuning me out right now, believing that, everything is legit. Other than a little of inflation here and there, all is well with America, and there's not too much more to say about it. So I think that we have a massive ideological split in Europe and America, even in Asia now. We're seeing that happen worldwide, but particularly in America.
I have a question. You say the oligarchs, right?
Yeah.
Who are the oligarchs?
The too big to fails. Right? When they commit major crimes. And this has to do with political families as well, like we're seeing with Hunter Biden, and his massive control and cover up. So these are agencies, corporations, zombie corporations. You have to look at 50+% of all the companies listed on the S&P 500 are zombie corporations that are essentially insolvent, that buy back their own stock and are allowed to continue to do so because we have the Federal Reserve keeps interest rates at nearly, very low levels of interest, basically where they don't have to pay any interest back. They've been doing this since 2008. So you have companies that are essentially derelict and defunct that are listed in the S&P 500 that continue to operate because they're too big to fail. You have insolvent banks. Right, you have Wells Fargo's agreed to pay $3.7 billion for stealing billions from what people do, people who do business with them, right? So you're seeing the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau ordered the bank to pay $1.7 billion as civil penalties and $2 billion to redress consumers, etc. These are increasingly signs that we live in a plutocracy. So we live in an operational plutocracy under the guise of totalitarian democracy. And so that is the big issue that's been pervasive and systemic throughout the way the country's been run, and will really show its it has been showing its ugly head with Elon Musk now with these disturbing revelations on Twitter, since he's taken ownership of it, proving that the FBI and various other federal agencies suppressed information on COVID, suppressed the information on basically threatened various news agencies and informed Silicon Valley thought police that they were to suppress all information on Hunter Biden and the Biden crime family that are funneling money from Ukraine into China directly into the New York Fed Bank, right? All those transactions we now have, that's all now out there on the internet. We have hundreds of journalists who are doing this investigation, and this has been ongoing. And the amount of data is in the terabytes, where we have we have information showing massive international fraud, and this goes right to the top to the White House. So I believe this is all going to come to a head in 2023. So half of the country understands what I'm saying. Half of the country totally finds this completely in the realm of
conspiracy theory.
Conspiracy theory, right?
Why do you think there is such a polarization now? I mean, the facts are out there, yet, like you say, half the population doesn't want to accept it.
Well, because half the population is drinking the Kool-Aid that they simply accept when it comes on BBC or CNN or whatever their mainstream news choice of the moment is. They accept it blindly, and they will say, "Oh no, I don't believe everything CNN says," but essentially they do. For instance, when we look at the midterm election, people voted Democrat on the exit polls. The AP exit polls stated that the people who voted Democrat said, yes, there is a problem with inflation, and I've been affected by it, but the government is not to blame. It's not Biden's fault. It's Putin's fault. And that's, anyone who understands basic economics knows that's completely absurd, right? There's no correlation between what's happening. The rate of inflation is higher now than it was in the late 70s, early 1980s, which resulted in a massive Democratic rout when Carter lost, I believe, 48 states against Reagan in the 1980 election. And the biggest exit polling number was inflation and the economy. We see the same situation now, but only worse. And yet people continue to maintain, right, the plausible deniability, regardless of the draconian political lockdowns, the false closures of billions of businesses, restricting people from leaving their homes, all that followed by historic levels of stagflationary forces that are now debilitating the economy at a level equivalent to what took down the Carter administration and resulted in the so-called Reagan conservative revolution.
Now, when you mention the oligarchs, this group transcends Democrat and Republican, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. They do not follow any particular political party orientation or dogma. They are an entrenched, powerful elite. They operate both within Wall Street and at the deepest levels of the military intelligence financial complex. So, basically we're talking about a deep state that has its own military, its own intelligence system, its own vast resources and reserves of money and money flows that operate outside of constitutional law.
So I know the oligarchs have a lot of this group has obviously been supporting the war in Ukraine. Why do you think they are so against Russia at this point in history? Like, Russia's become again number one enemy. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, because they know Russia is extremely vulnerable at this point. It no longer is. It's become apparently clear they no longer have the military strength or prowess that they once were when they were the Soviet Union. And so they're extremely vulnerable at this point. They've become, they've gone from a rival superpower to a world power, being reduced down to a regional power. And it's become very clear that, they're not in a position they don't have the economic means or the political will and the organization and infrastructure to fight a modern 21st century conventional war, even at their border. So that is why they want to basically break Russia so they can then integrate Russia into the larger European Union, which is essentially a super state. It's a super. The European Union basically is a fascist state because the people, right, that represent the various countries are not directly elected by those countries. Those representatives that are operating within Brussels are not directly elected by the people, right? So they're basically operating as a fascist state and enforce policy by decree.
Interesting. So regarding the situation right now in Ukraine, do you see this spreading or just the status quo at this point?
No, I think the thing is escalating. I think the fact of the matter is that Russia has always been known to strike back when everybody thinks it's down and out. This happened back in World War II. We saw that when we saw about 12 million Russians get killed due to the invasion of Nazi Germany, which was only 12 miles away from sacking Moscow. And then Stalingrad occurred, right, where it was the biggest, up until that point in the war, it was the biggest defeat, the first and biggest defeat the Nazi army ever encountered. Nobody saw it coming, including the Allies. Nobody saw it coming. And that's the situation we see right now. And it's not beyond the Russians to use whatever means and whatever weapon systems they have at their disposal in order to win. Because losing, especially now, losing is not an option for Putin.
Right. Did you see Dmitry Medyev's New Year's Eve predictions?
I looked through them. They were, America's going bankrupt, and I saw those.
The Fourth Reich will be created.
Yeah,
encompassing Germany, Poland, the Baltic states. Yeah.
Well, I think
pretty
he's
interesting.
partly
What do you
right.
think of those?
Well, I think the Fourth Reich has already been created with the Eurozone. It is a Reich. It is a supra-European state, and it prints money. And it determines, right? It basically prints money and determines a policy that is not based on the economics of each particular country, but it just has this overall domain policy that's very top down, and that it forces on all local communities who have no. Listen, what the biggest issue with Europe is there is taxation with no representation occurring. And if you don't call that fascism, I don't know what it is. You have a merger of too big to fail institutions, too big to fail corporations, merging and operating in concert with too big to fail government. And
his 10th prediction is the Bretton Woods system of monetary management will collapse, leading to IMF and World Bank crash. What do you think of that?
Yeah, well, I believe what he's referring to is the fact that the U.S. dollar as the means for trade settlement for all nations, meaning in all nations who sell oil or have anything that is to be traded, right, country to country, right? So all oil has to be purchased in dollars, and anything that is traded on the open markets and the commodity markets has to be traded in U.S. dollars, meaning they have to swap their money for U.S. dollars in order for that trade settlement to be commenced. So that system has been breaking down since 2008 ever slowly. And there is now many people out there predicting that we are going to see a global financial reset event where they'll have to have a big meeting in determining what is going to be this new currency that all the central banks can agree on, that will have some degree of gold backing to it, because it's the only thing all central banks agree on is gold, right? All central banks can agree on gold. So whatever new type of system they put in place that will replace the dollar or the petrodollar system, it's going to have some gold backing or affiliated with gold, because that's the only thing central banks. So that is coming up 2023. We could have a major event with the global economy, with a major breakdown that triggers that event that's been in process for a while here. And that's, you have to understand that this is all connected with what the World Economic Forum's been trying to put out, because a central bank digital currency that all central banks can agree on is part and parcel to their new economic model.
Interesting. So, what about the Pluto return of the United States, particularly in terms of the domestic politics? I mean, a lot of people predicted a red tsunami during the last election. That didn't exactly happen, but what's your views on what's happening domestically?
Well, let's be clear about this. I mean, everyone says that Donald Trump's down and out. It's over. He'll never be president, and it's any day now he's going to announce he's no longer running. The reality is that 82% of all the people he endorsed and backed and campaigned for the midterms won. That's a big percentage. So, now what's interesting here is in the races the Republicans lost, they only lost by less than 1% of the vote in almost, in these two close to call races that
Very
were
close.
basically,
Mm-hmm.
and these were races of incumbent Democrats. These were races. And the other thing too is if you look at New York State, for instance, you look at California, look how red they are now. I never seen it this red since 1980, where you had districts going red since 1980. That's not talked about either. So, yes, it certainly wasn't the red wave we were expecting that happened in 2010 during Barack Obama's term. But certainly we had an almost but not quite red wave, and it's very telling. And what's interesting is the fact that independent voters, decided this time not to vote red when they were inclined to, because they felt the Biden administration was not responsible for the economic woes and problems that Americans are facing, but was relevant to what's happening in Ukraine and China. So this is something, right? When that is because of the misinformation and the massive, the misinformation campaigns put out by the financial media. And the same thing's happening now with Ukraine. I mean, a New York Times report stated that the Pentagon was no longer concerned about Ukrainian missiles attacking inside of Russia that could lead to a major military escalation, right? Based on the fact that Moscow hasn't yet responded with tactical nuclear weapons on Ukraine or NATO. So, I mean, this is how absurd. This is all the Pluto return. This is what the astrologers don't want to talk about. You go look it up. See who's talking about this. Nobody, right? The reason is because we are living in a dangerous time, and talking about dangerous things doesn't get you more YouTube views. It doesn't get you higher social media accounts, right? But the USA Pluto return is accelerating and intensifying. And it really just has to do with with the mainstream media constantly trying to bamboozle us into believing we're going to return to a deflationary pre-pandemic economy, right? And that's impossible, because now we are in a global war economy with every significant power worldwide now scrambling behind the scenes to shore up their military and national security as we go from the first act in 2022 into the second act into 2023.
Do you see Trump running in 2024, or do you know there was the system now? It seems like they're trying to prevent it through this January 6th hearing. But do you see him running and possibly winning again?
Well, I don't know about winning. That's way too out of my ability to see that. I see him running. I see nothing coming out of January 6th I said that last year. That last year was supposed to be some other big thing, and I said nothing will come of it. Nothing will come of it.
Mm-hmm.
They do not have. Look, if they had something on him, he would be arrested by now, right? He'd be indicted, arrested, charged, etc. They have nothing on him. They cannot stop him, right? And now you find Democrats, you find CNN extolling the virtues of the DeSantis administration in Florida. I find that very interesting, right? As if he's already the GOP nominee for 2024, as if Trump already stepped down. So look, there's an interesting setup here that's happening, and unfortunately, you're going to see more of a splitting happening. That's another prediction. I don't see the split resolving itself. Look, anyone who has real doubts about what I'm saying here in your audience, all right, Fox News directly addressed a CIA operative who has access to the files that are still unreleased by the CIA, who's looked at those files, seen those files in the CIA in regards to the JFK assassination. And they asked the CIA operative, who they could not name, but they verified, yes, he works within the CIA. Did the CIA hand in the murder? Did the CIA have a hand in the murder of John F. Kennedy? And the CIA operative said, the answer is yes. I believe they were directly involved. It's a whole different country from what we thought it was. It's all fake. And what he means by that is we live in a totalitarian democracy since November 1963 onward. And the Pluto return is all about that. It's all about bringing that to the forefront and making us realize what we really live in. What we've been living in is a fantasy, right? And we've been living under an oligarchy run as a plutocracy with the window dressing of a totalitarian democracy. So and that's what 2023 is about.
So, yeah, bringing that awareness out. So what is it going to take to change that? Do you think someone like Trump can do that? Or is Trump actually still part of this system?
I never thought Trump was part of the system, because if he was, they wouldn't have a problem with him. I mean, look, the fact that they are so dead set against him indicates to me he is not one of them. The fact that they're also for DeSantis makes me wonder if DeSantis is part of them or has been brought into their circle. I'm not anti-DeSantis. I just think it's amazing how everyone's just switched and said, oh, DeSantis is young. He's a great governor. I'm voting for him. CNN even had a whole expose how he's one of the most effective governors despite being a Republican. That was very telling to me.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. So it sounds like they are grooming him to be the GOP candidate.
Exactly. And they, because they're setting up who's going to be the Democratic candidate, because one of my other predictions is I don't see Biden getting through this year. I think a lot of things are going to unravel for him in a very powerful way, where the plausible deniability by the White House press and the media that cover for him, is going to be almost impossible to maintain.
Yeah. Well, so what do you think? Some of the weirdness is coming out. What do you think is going to create a shift in our policies?
Well, I just think we're going to. Yeah, I mean, I really wish I had the what do they call it? The omniscience to see exactly. It looks like to me that many of well, first of all, the border crisis is going to accelerate and go from bad to worse. I mean, I don't know how it can get any worse than this, but it looks that seems to be. Now, the reason I mention that is when the Roman Empire went through its first Pluto return, they had a major border crisis. It was the first time that border crisis resulted in a flood of illegal immigration that shook the foundations of the empire economically and politically. because the emperor that was in control of the time, he was the most ineffectual emperor in the history of the Roman Empire. He had a very loose policy about it, right? And that was one of the reasons the Praetorian Guard, which is equivalent to the Secret Service, assassinated him. So I'm seeing a very similar situation. So when you look at past empires, especially empires like the Roman Empire, the world's first superpower, went through their first Pluto return, 247 years, the first 247 years of its life as an empire. We're right now, 247, 248 years, right now, as actually the Pluto return, the final Pluto return is tomorrow. We saw the empire go through a existential crisis, both internally and externally. It was the first time the Persian Empire and a number of other empires decided, hey, you know what? Even though they're more powerful than us, if we can coordinate and work together, even though we're not friends with one another, but if we can agree to work together, we can take them down. We can take back what they've taken from us. And that's exactly what started happening. And the empire eventually recovered, but it took like 30, 40 years of crisis, nonstop crisis. The empire almost went under completely. And it wasn't for the emergence of the 5 good emperors that followed, right? Towards the end of that crisis, the empire would have broken up and disintegrated.
Right. Yeah, we have confidence that the American people will, get the country back on track again. We're hoping. How does China fit into all this? Some say this absolute control that the Chinese now has over their citizens is sort of the wave of the future for the United States. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, well, there's no doubt that the CCP has tremendous tentacles inside of the military-industrial complex, where they have compromised people at the highest levels of government, certainly at the highest levels of the media, the highest levels of corporations. We're seeing this exposed with many of the articles coming out by the Epoch Times and other journalists out there, real journalists, I should say. Yeah, so there's no doubt that we are in a Cold War, we're in a technology war, we're in a currency war, we're in a trade war with China, and that is bordering now on to a all-out hot war over dominance, who will dominate the Indo-Pacific region and all of the trade that occurs. I mean, more trade, the amount of trade that commences through the Taiwan Strait is equal to the amount of trade that commences coming out of the Persian Gulf. So that is a tremendously important strategic area for the U.S. And the fact that we see the situation where 90% of the high-end chips, right, the chips that go into missiles, into computers, into any sophisticated instrument today comes out of Taiwan. And China does not have that technology. They need to acquire that technology. And the only way they're going to acquire it is to take out Taiwan. And that's something that Xi Jinping that made as part of his promise to the Chinese people upon his 3rd term in office. So that 3rd term just started. He assigned a general, he picked a general to come up with a battle plan to defeat the Americans, the American Navy, to use all weapon systems at their disposal between now and 2025 to make sure that happens before the next president takes over.
Yes, it's interesting, but it's fascinating. So we're going through. So we should expect a lot of changes in 2023. What's your advice for people, especially people who are aware of what's going on? Any positive advice for how to approach 2023?
Well, what people need to become much more engaged, much more involved. You know, I've been saying this for years. Most people are disengaged. Most people think somebody else is going to take care of it. I told many people they were going to see it really affect them this year, and that certainly has happened. I mean, we see we have most baby boomers who paid into the system now, and they see that their their IRA or their pension, is down over 33%, and yet there's no recession. That's another thing too. I was really shocked when voters in the midterms went out and voted, didn't blame Biden, didn't blame the economy, didn't blame anything, and yet they were deleveraged greater than they were in 2008. So everyone talks about the 2008 crisis, but the actual stock market underperformed even greater. In fact, the real estate prices have cliff dive faster in 2022 than they did in 2008. And yet we still have a majority of the country thinks everything is fine. We're going to keep the people in power. There's no need to shift anything. So I don't know what it's going to take. I said to people, this is going to hit home. And it did hit home. But again, people took no action. They didn't vote any differently. They didn't do anything differently. You don't see any big protests going on, right? Everyone's more concerned about the ESG movement, which is really a falsely based narrative to engineer the socialization of wealth and power away from the masses in order to implement a one world order with a central bank digital currency that's all pushed down and pontificated and authorized by the World Economic Forum. These are the things that are going on. And so the advice I would give people today is that you need to think for yourself, because because the narrative is going to fail you. You're going to get hurt by following the narrative that everybody else is following.
Well, I see, at least in New York, you're seeing a lot of activism in the underground Republican movement. And I think on New Year's Eve, we're going to have also Steve Spear, who's an interesting guy. He founded the Medical Freedom Party. So sort of this grassroots activism is starting. It seems like, it's really taking hold in, a lot of areas in the United States. So that's one positive movement, I think. Yeah.
Well, it's happening in China where people are protesting in China saying, give me liberty or give me death. I mean, it's happening all over in 42 different cities in China right now. That doesn't get on CNN, but if you go on the internet, go on YouTube, you'll see it all over the place being reported. So we have two different narratives. We live in a country of two different populations. Ones who just look at mainstream media and get their fill from NPR and they're good to go. And then you see a completely different narrative happening on the internet, on YouTube, all throughout social media that's completely different. So, that's the big split. And I think it's all coming to a head in 2023. The other thing too would be like, what I think one of the goals, regardless of what's happening in the world, this is going to be a year where you're going to have to be more on top of manifesting your destiny according to your core nature, right? There's going to be a sense that if people aren't really living their life they should be living, the situation will coerce them, or their current situation will coerce them to a point where they're going to have to make a set of decisions that go way outside their comfort zone that they should have made back in 2021. So I think a lot of stuff that should have, could have, would have happened in 2021 that didn't, right? They're going to all come to a head in a very powerful way. And it's all really going to be about manifesting one's destiny, because I think a lot of people feel off track this year because they're not manifesting their destiny according to their core nature, based on their soul's code and calling.
Well, that's great. Well, that's a really interesting overview, William. Thank you very much. I think it's been a lot of our viewers are going to be extremely interested, and I'd recommend all the viewers to check out Global Transformation Astrology. That's your group, and it's in williamstickevers.com. That's where people can access your work. So yeah, keep up the good work. It's great. I look for every month, and I look forward to these talks that you do on world events and the economy. So.
Thank you, Scott. It was a real pleasure being on today. I want to wish everyone a happy new year, and everyone, like, this life is a work in progress, and live your truth. I think that's the big key going into this new year. Live your truth and be true to yourself.
Good. Well, happy new year, William. Thank you very much.
Happy new year.
Let's play hide and seek. You hide and I'll find you. Ready?